Thank you. Good afternoon. I have to apologize. I don't work for The Guardian anymore, and I get told off if they see that up there, so I have to say I don't work for The Guardian anymore. I liked how Claire started her talk this morning with a little bit of Turkish, so I'm going to try some of my own. İyi Türkçe konuşamıyorum. Özür dilerim. I'm English. I have to get I'm sorry in there somehow. Excuse me. So, I want to talk today about how we estimate design when we're talking to the business, because getting design out of the door is the thing that we do. There's no point when we design things if they don't turn into products, and they only turn into products when the business builds them. So, what's the first part of a business building a product? Well, that's the product manager comes to you and says, when will it be ready? That's always the question. When will it be ready? How long will it take? Because they have Gantt charts to make. They need to know when this is going to get out the door. And I find that a really hard question to answer, because design is a messy process, and we go back and forth on ourselves, and we're never quite sure. You can't estimate design. You know, it just goes back and forth and on and on and on. But the thing is, design is not the only creative process that happens when you're building a digital product. The coders are following a creative process as well, and they seem to be able to estimate design quite well. Here's a picture of a coder. And so over the 15 years that I've been working in digital products, I've often asked developers, how do you know how to estimate stuff? And they tell me, you just kind of know. It's a bit of experience, it's a bit of having done it before, and they kind of come up, in Agile, they've come up with this process that they call planning poker, and they do t-shirt sizing. So instead of saying, this bit of code, this feature will take me a day and a half to build, they'll say, well, it's a small story. Or this thing might take me a week to build. They'll say it's an extra large story. And then there's a couple down here. The infinity sign means it's too big, and the question mark sign means we don't have enough information. And the coffee sign says, oh my God, let's have a break. And I have been talking to more and more devs about this recently, and one of them, Liz Keogh, who's a fantastic developer, fantastic at seeding good development practice into organizations as well, told me that she's sort of found a way of formalizing this with a framework that's called Cynefin. And so I started working with her to understand what Cynefin means, and particularly why you pronounce Cynefin like the name Kevin with a sneeze in the middle. And I can answer that last question first. You pronounce it like Kevin with a sneeze in the middle because it's a Welsh word. Cynefin, the framework, was invented by a very clever guy called Dave Snowden, who's at Snowded on Twitter. And he's used it in a variety of different formats. He's used it to work with governments. He's used it to help design nuclear power plants. And now, of course, we're using it to help figure out how to build software. As a Welsh word, it has a particular meaning that you can't translate into any other language, which is really helpful. But it sort of means, if you think about the town you grew up in, and the way it's still the town you grow up in now, but it's changed in all sorts of different ways, and it's progressed and evolved. That's sort of what Cynefin means. And he likes to think of it as an organization. It will stay the same organization as you improve and evolve the things it does. So that's enough sort of setting it in place. Let's talk about what Cynefin actually means. In the middle of the Cynefin model, you have disorder. And disorder is uncertainty, it's risk, it's not being sure about anything. And it's often a place that a lot of designers, especially when we're younger in our careers, we work from, right? A client comes along and says, I need a website. And we go, OK, I'll design you a website. And we just start drawing. Disorder is a really bad place to be once you're in any sort of scale of project, because it's a place where you can't really see what's coming, you can't really keep things together, and you want to get out of there as quickly as possible. So the way you get the things that you're working on, the feature requests or the requirements, whatever it is, out of disorder is you start to move it into one of the 4 areas or regions that surrounds it in the model. The way this model works is you start in the bottom right-hand corner there, and you sort of go up through anti-clockwise towards the bottom left-hand corner in order of increasing complexity of the thing you've been asked to build. So what it means is every time you get a feature request, you need to figure out which of those 4 domains it lives in. The first of those domains is the obvious domain, or it used to be called simple. They changed it quite recently. And in the obvious domain, you're looking at things that are so obvious that it actually hurts you if you try and do anything clever with them. So this would be things like login controls. Everyone knows what a login control looks like. There's a field for your email address, a field for your password, a forgotten password link, a sign-in button, and a register link. If you do anything else to that, it's just going to get impossibly difficult for your users to understand. Similarly, unsubscribing from a newsletter. A one-click unsubscribe is all you want. Anything more than that just adds friction, is just painful for the user to do. Similarly, if you have a place where you're choosing to show people how to get to you, put a Google map on there. Don't go inventing maps yourself, right? In the obvious domain, just serve the need. It's about figuring out what's the need, how do I serve it in the way that these needs are always served? Because if you try and do anything else, you'll just make it worse for the user, and you'll just waste time. So the second domain is the complex domain. And in this one, you're taking things that happen quite often, but they are quite specific to your business or the product that you're building. So a good example of this would be, say you've got a recipe website, and you need to include sharing controls and adverts on it. So every website has to have sharing controls. Every website has to have adverts, or most websites have to have adverts. But the way you fit them into your page is going to be specific to you. But what you can do is you can look at all of those other ways that that problem's been solved in the past in other products, and you can figure out how the patterns that exist there can be applied to you. And there are all sorts of UX pattern libraries that you can look at that will help you understand this stuff. Similarly, this is a picture from the Turkish e-visa website where you're choosing your date of travel. And this is a really nice date picker because it's very easy to sort of go a month forward and back and say, right, I'm arriving on the 10th of May as I was. But actually, the reason I pulled this one out is because they have 2 different date pickers on the Turkish e-visa website, because you have to also tell the Turkish government your date of birth. And this would be a terrible date picker for that, because you'd have to go back month by month by month for 30 or 40 years. So instead, they've got a completely different one in there. So that's a really good use of patterns. That's a really good use of understanding this complex problem and the fact that you can't simply slot in a replacement, but you don't want to go reinventing the whole date picker. Another example, this is a chat app where what they've done to introduce you to a new feature that's in it, they've just put a full screen overlay. There's lots of different ways to introduce people to a new feature that you've added to an app. You could do a tooltip, you could do a launch screen. In this case, they've chosen this one because it's, in their opinion, the right thing to do for their application. So in this domain, it's about figuring out what sort of problem am I solving, what are the common ways to solve this, and how do they apply to my product? The one that gets really interesting is the complicated domain. And this is where, as designers, I think most of our time should be spent. When you're here, this is the thing that adds the value to the business, right? This is a problem that probably not many other people are solving, and that's why your business thinks there's money in it. It's the thing that differentiates your business from other people who are doing similar or related things. And this is where you need to really think carefully about the problem, and not just the solution to the problem, but understanding the problem fully before you even try and think about how you're going to approach solving it. So a good example of this, I think, is the Uber interface, where they're showing you the nearby cars. They've had to cram an awful lot of information into this interface, but they've done it quite nicely. And you'll notice they've used some very common patterns to do it. You know, it's a Google map in the background. They've got a slider along the bottom there. But then they're showing you all of the cars nearby, and they're showing you their direction, their heading, where they're moving to. So they've done a lot of thought through this. They've done a lot of analysis on this. Another example, and this I think is a really good example of someone getting into a very complicated domain and really doing a lot of good work on it. On Netflix, one of the things they want you to do is when you've watched something, they want to show you things that are like that thing that you just watched, so that you carry on using Netflix and you see value in your Netflix subscription. So they've got down to the point where they can slice and dice the genres that they show you in Netflix so finely that you get to this point where TV shows where the people in the poster are crossing their arms and looking severe. But it works. They ran a competition to improve the way that recommendations happen in Netflix, and no one could win it. They couldn't beat what was already there. The complicated domain, you know when you're in the complicated domain because it's the point where you're doing research. It's the point where you're asking yourself, how do users behave in this moment? How are we going to show these things to users? And, excuse me, in the complicated domain, this is where you want to start really engaging the business. This is where you want to start running workshops. This is where you want to start ideating, doing design studios, because if you understand this problem and solve it as well as possible, that's the thing that will make your product, your company, more successful. So in this case, it's about understanding, and it's about making sure that you go through discovery and testing to really get the best out of the solution that you choose. So that's what the whole model looks like. Obvious, complex, complicated, chaotic. And then there's one more thing, which is this tiny little fault. Sorry, there's the chaotic domain as well. And in the chaotic domain, this is where you do things like you put the app live and the update crashes anytime a user tries to launch it, or you start getting terrible reviews through the App Store because you've made an interface change that users hate, or you have a big security issue, you're leaking user details. Basically, the house is on fire, right? When the house is on fire, you don't peer in through the window trying to figure out if it was the toaster or the electric heater that started the fire. You put the fire out. But then you don't want the house to catch fire again, so then you figure out why the fire started, and you do whatever's necessary to stop it happening again. Now, as designers, we're quite lucky, because this kind of scenario rarely happens to us. This tends to be more in production. But what does tend to happen, and where design does fall into the chaotic domain, is where you're doing a workshop, you're doing a piece of discovery, or even you're just presenting a piece of work, and one of the stakeholders says, oh, wait a minute, there's a great opportunity here. And it opens up this huge can of worms about, you know, a new feature or a whole new pivot of the business, or even killing what you're currently doing because it's more important to do something else. When you get into that, that means you have to spend time to work out if the thing that you've just discovered in your discovery process is valuable or not. And if it is valuable, then you have to fit it into the rest of it. But if it's not valuable, you have to get rid of it. So in this case, this is about making sure that you sense what's going on and then analyze the value of it to ensure that you don't, again, waste time on it. So that's the full model. There's one more thing. There's this little fold between the obvious and chaotic domain. And the reason for that is just to remind you that anything can fall into chaos really, really quickly and easily. And just be careful to not push too hard on things that live in the obvious domain, because you can push them into chaos really easily. So how does that help us in design? It's quite a technical model. It's deceptively simple. The more you dig into it, the more you find that it has sort of hidden lessons and hidden complexity all through it, ironically enough. Well, it goes back to what I said about your stakeholder, who is now waiting another 14 minutes longer for you to tell him how long it's going to take you to build this thing. It goes back to how developers use this. How complex something is a clue to how much effort it's going to take to design or to build it. And so Cynefin teaches us that actually the place where you want to spend the most time, the place where you want to spend the most effort, is in the complicated domain, where your business is probably finding the most value from what it does. Most of the things you design, however, are going to be day-to-day stuff, user journeys that get people into the app, through the app, and out of the app again, things that tell your user that there's a new feature, things that tell your user that they've been issued with a receipt. If it's Uber, here's the receipt for your journey. Those things are all in the obvious and complex domains. Those are all things that are actually relatively quick to develop, or, sorry, relatively quick to design, because there's already patterns out there for all of them. So what Cynefin allows you to do is save your effort for the places where it brings the most value back to the business. And it gives you a language for doing that to the business as well. If you can teach this to the business, what you can say is when they ask you for a feature, oh, brilliant, that's an obvious problem. It won't take me very long to do that at all. That's a small problem. And again, you know, if it's a login control and you've got a stakeholder who says, why doesn't the login control animate and bounce and change color and do all these things? You say, well, it's an obvious problem. We don't want to solve obvious problems that way. Complex problems, again, might take a little bit longer, might take a bit of research, might take a little bit of iterating the designs. So maybe it's a medium, possibly a large. With complicated problems, it's going to take us a week, just flat out. We're going to have to do discovery. We may have to do research. We may have to do testing. Various different parts of the business are going to have to come together to start making decisions on this stuff. So it's large or extra large. And then you really can't account for chaotic problems. You just got to know that when they arise, it's going to take you out of the flow, and you're going to have to start working on a solution for it, because they have to be addressed where they stand. So when you look at it like this, actually, Cynefin is a way that we can start using T-shirt sizing in the same way that developers do. And it's a way that we can give our stakeholders and our project managers some confidence that when we talk about how long things are going to take, that they're actually going to get something in more or less that same length of time. Just like for developers, for us, this is not a prediction. This is not us telling the future. This is just us giving a reasonable estimate for how long we think it's going to take. And it's a really good guide for us as well, because I know a lot of designers who spend forever polishing things that live in the obvious domain or that live in the complex domain, and they tweak them perfectly and they fiddle with them, or they want to reinvent the wheel. If you want to reinvent the world, then go to the complicated domain and fix the real problems that live there, because that's where that actually has value. I want to give a shout out to this lady who's Liz Keogh, who, like I say, she is the person who introduced me to Cynefin in the first place. She's been using it with development teams for years and years. Her blog post of Cynefin for developers is probably the best introduction to this, although I'm going to see if I can find Vitaly after this and see if he'll let me write an article for Smashing Magazine about it for designers. But she's really good. I would not be able to talk in anything like the detail or clarity about Cynefin that I can unless I had spoken to her for a very long time. So I just want to say thank you to her, and go and read her article. It's really good. And that's me. I'm going to leave this up here in case anyone wants to get a shot of it, and I think I've got about 3 minutes for questions. Or we can take 3 minutes back out of the schedule. Cool. Thank you very much.